Within the same MSA does not require a new LCA.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Visa Vibes. I'm Emily Newman, managing partner of Reddy Newman Brown PC.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Brown. I'm also a partner here at Reddy Newman Brown PC.
All right, so Stephen, with this episode, we're talking about something pretty specific. There's been a lot of online chatter lately, a lot of social media posts, a lot of posts from congressmen that suggest that based on LCA data, there are millions of H-1B workers in our country and stealing jobs and, making all these claims about H-1B workers and the number and where they're located, all based on LCA data, the labor condition application. So as soon as we see those posts, we're both like, that's not what the LCA does. What are you talking about?
I think I made a quip about one of the senators. I mean, like these folks are supposed to be the ones maybe writing new laws and they don't even understand what's on the books. But I get it, it's all confusing. But yeah, I kind of wanted to do this because people are treating the existence of an LCA or an LCA being filed or even certified as like new people, new jobs, and there's I don't think LCAs tell much of any story. I think it's bad data sets. And it's not a petition. I mean, we've seen there were LCAs for 7-Eleven cashiers. They did not get an H-1B. I can guarantee it. They did not get an H-1B. They still have to go through the approval process. And then my favorite part of this is, there's this graphic going around like, here's all these LCAs for the past 10 years. There's almost 7 million H-1B workers, as if like no differentiation between extensions, transfers, amendments. Sometimes there's a typo in an LCA, so you file another one for the same petition. The LCAs are just horrible data sets.
Yeah. But it is important because the LCAs are the data that are actually public. And so those details can get pulled. They're on the DOL website and get analyzed. They're used in articles. People like to make a lot of conclusions based on the data, but a lot of those conclusions are wrong because they're not understanding what exactly the LCA is representing. So today we want to talk about what the LCA actually is, what the employer is actually promising when they do file one, and what are the ongoing obligations that the company has. And then when do you need a new LCA?
Yeah, and if you're in HR, in-house counsel, H-1B worker who's like never really understood, we know we do this LCA thing, but you don't really understand what's going on. So we're going to try to hit on, and for the people who hate me because I do what I do, maybe we'll educate you a little bit about what the process is.
Sounds good.
So let's start from the beginning. What the LCA is formally the labor condition application. It's not to be confused with the perm, which also has an LCA, the labor certification application. This is the ETA 9035 or 9035E. It's filed with the Department of Labor online through the Foreign Labor, what is the flag system? Foreign Labor Attestation.
Application gateway?
Yeah, maybe. It stands for something. Flag stands for something. And so you have to do a H1 an LCA 9035 or 9035E for H1Bs, H1B1s, which are our Singapore and Chile version, and E3s, which are Australian. The first starting point in any of these cases is the labor condition application.
Yeah, and the timing matters. The LCA has to be certified by the Department of Labor before a company can actually file an H-1B petition, which goes to USCIS under Department of Homeland Security. So we've got different agencies handling there. So the order of operations is first, the employer has to provide notice that they're getting ready to file an LCA. Then they file the LCA electronically. DOL reviews it. Usually within 7 business days, they will either certify it, or deny it. And then that certified LCA is what gets attached to the I-129 petition and filed with USCIS.
Yeah, and you're good about that generally 7 days because we have a government shutdown, right? But that's something I wanted to flag at the top. There really isn't an adjudication in this like the H-1B. And so a lot of people get mad because the Department of Labor is approving LCAs at like a 95% rate. Um, what this is Department of Labor reviews these for completeness and obvious errors. And so I think over my time of doing it, I've seen LCAs get denied for three reasons. Number one, the FEIN wasn't verified by DOL before filing. That's usually just somebody thought they had filed it before. Not an issue. I've seen one where there was like a typo and someone wrote in like 90,000 per hour instead of per year, and DOL was like, no, we think this is wrong. Or if you have a typo in the wage where it's below the prevailing wage and it's they're going to say, no, we can't certify it. I think that's the only reasons I've ever seen them get denied. And they're clearly errors. There's not a decision making process in this.
Yeah, so the LCA is basically an attestation based filing. The employer is making sworn statements in the LCA under penalty of perjury that certain things are true. And the DOL takes those attestations at face value at the time of filing. So the actual substantive review of the position to determine whether it's a specialty occupation, whether the worker qualifies for that specialty occupation, whether there's a bona fide job opportunity. All of that happens with USCIS on the petition filing. None of that is looked at by DOL on the LCA filing.
Yeah, and the LCA doesn't look at education. I mean, there's nothing that's submitted with it. So when somebody points at the LCA and says, "Oh, company is hiring an H-1B worker for X rate at Y salary," this is just evidence that the company has said, "Hey, we intend to hire someone for this role at this salary, if and when the petition is approved, or if it's an amendment or anything like that." I think it's a meaningful distinction because it's not the same thing as a hiring. It's not the same thing as a petition approval. It's not the same thing as the worker actually being on payroll. And there's any number, especially for our Chinese and Indian national friends that are backlogged. People were like, oh, there's 6 million of these over 10 years, or 7 million of these. Well, an individual that changes jobs, changes employers is going to need an LCA. If they have an extension, every 3 years, there's a new LCA. If they move, there's a new LCA. And so I joked on Twitter, Emily, like it's not a labor clone application. It's not a new worker every time. It's, hey, we have to go through this because there's a reason we have to file a petition with USCIS. Here's our terms and conditions of employment.
Yeah, so you might have one worker that's had 10 LCAs over the lifetime of their career
Yeah.
in the US. That doesn't mean there's 10 workers. It's just
Yeah.
the same person filing again and again and again because that's what our rules require. And a lot of times employers do file LCAs that they never end up using. They never file the petition for. This might be when you're getting ready for H-1B cap season and you file the LCA in advance, so you're ready to go on April 1st if someone gets selected. But if they don't get selected, you don't use that LCA. They file them if, maybe they've made the job offer, they're getting ready to file the H-1B, and then the employee says, you know what, never mind. They withdrew their acceptance of the job. Sometimes a petition gets denied. That doesn't turn into a hire or an actual worker. The LCA is just a prerequisite. It's not actually proof of a person that's been hired and filling an H-1B job.
And I've had times where we've had multiple LCAs before we filed the petition. Maybe the company says, "Hey, working at 123 Main Street," and then when the LCA gets certified, they're like, "Hold up, we meant 124." Or so let's refile the LCA. Or maybe they've changed where they're going to work after that LCA was filed. So there's any number of reasons LCAs exist, and it's not really proof of anything other than the LCA being filed.
Yeah. I always think of one case where I actually, every 3 years, have 6 LCAs included in the petition because it's a physical therapist that goes to
Yeah.
patients' homes in different counties around the location. So for every county, it's a different MSA, different prevailing wage level. So we pay the highest of all of them, but we have to have all of them on there. And to get that many counties that they travel to in the petition, it took like 6 LCAs
So
for one
not
person.
six physical therapists.
Right. In case you
Yeah.
were wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's again, I think when you look at the data, it's proof an LCA has been filed, and maybe some analytics on it, but it doesn't even show the accurate compensation because the LCA is just a base wage. It doesn't take into account bonuses, stock, anything like that. So, but you make all these attestations with it. I think that's the meat and potatoes, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So what exactly are they attesting to? There are four core labor condition statements that are in every single LCA, and these are based on the regulations at 20 CFR 655.731 through 734.
Yeah, and these are worth knowing if you're a company that deals with H-1B processes, because if you violate them, there's wage and hour division on Department of Labor. We know with Project Firewall, they're trying to investigate these more. There's civil money penalties that can come about. And so these aren't just, I signed it, well, I don't have to ever think about it. You have to follow through.
So, number one LCA attestation that an employer is agreeing to is wages. The employer is attesting that the H-1B worker will be paid the higher of two figures, either the actual wage, which is what the employer pays all of its other employees with similar experience, similar qualifications in the same position in the same location, or the prevailing wage for that particular occupation in that location, whichever is higher. So if people keep saying that, oh, they're hiring foreign workers because they can pay them less than American workers, that's just not true. If that's actually happening, it is a violation and it should be reported, and DOL should be investigating it and charging back wages and debarring those employers. They're supposed to pay, if you've got US worker over here being paid $100,000 that has a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience, you've got foreign worker over here who's being paid $80,000, has a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience doing the exact same job in the exact same location. That is a violation because they are not paying the actual wage. That's the requirement. Even if the prevailing wage is only 70,000, 80,000 meets the prevailing wage, but it doesn't meet the actual wage, and therefore that would be a violation.
And I get there's a lot of debate about prevailing wages and how they're calculated because employer A might, be different than employer B, and that's being looked at by Department of Labor, with proposed rules. Um, there's other attestations, with the salary, right? You have to pay for non-productive time. You can't unlawfully bench someone by saying, you got to sit here. We're not going to pay you. You got to pay. And then benefits. You can't differentiate your benefits package to between non-immigrants, similarly situated non-immigrants and U.S. workers. So if you offer 401k, health care, all that to U.S. workers, it's got to be the same to non-immigrant workers. It's designed to treat everybody equally.
All right, another one where everyone has to be treated equally, working conditions. So when the employer is signing that LCA, they're attesting that they're going to be giving the H-1B worker the same working conditions that a U.S. worker would get, and that the H-1B worker does not adversely affect the working conditions of other similarly employed U.S. workers. They can't mess with the hours, the shift assignments, the working conditions of the U.S. workers to favor a foreign worker. They all have to be on that equal footing.
Number three, they have to attest that there's no strikeout. Strikeouts got baseballs on my mind. Strikes or lockouts. The employer attests at the data filing there is no strike, lockout, or work stoppage at the company, at the place of employment. If there is, after they file, they have to notify Department of Labor within 3 days, and the LCA can't be used until the strike or lockout is ended. I think this is relatively uncommon unless we're talking about unions.
All right. And then number four is notice. This one, trips people up. Their employers think, okay, we filed the LCA, now we're done. No, the company has to first, before they can submit the LCA, provide notice to other workers at that work location that an LCA is about to be filed. That notice has to have the job information, the occupation category, the prevailing wage, and then a explanation that any, problems or perceived violations can be reported to the Department of Labor. Um, and then if there is a union involved, they have to provide that notice to the union. If there's no union, then it's either by posting it, like physically posting it in two conspicuous locations at the place of employment, or they can provide it by electronic notification to all workers that would be in that same job.
Yeah, I'm glad they've gone more of an emphasis with the electronic notification because especially if we have more remote work, it's always kind of funny telling companies like, how do we post this when he's working from home? Like, I guess post it in the kitchen. Um, but the timing is also important. It has to be posted no more than 30 days before the LCA is filed or on the date of filing. It has to remain posted for at least 10 calendar days. For electronic notice, you have to show that it was sent and available during that time.
All right. And then there are some additional attestations that are specifically for H-1B dependent employers, which we'll define in a little bit, or if there have been willful violators. So those employers actually have to attest not only that they have not displaced U.S. workers, but if they're placed at another company, that the secondary employer also has not displaced U.S. workers in order to bring on this foreign worker. And that's for a 90-day window before and after filing. Also, employers that fall under this category have to actually attempt to find U.S. workers. They have to take good faith effort to recruit U.S. workers first and keep documentation of that. Those, again, are not for every single LCA, but just for those LCAs where the employer is an H-1B dependent employer or a willful violator.
Yes, let's talk about what that means for a minute because I see this flying around on social media too. It's like, oh, it's an H-1B dependent company, therefore, they're all H-1Bs. It's everybody. So this is actually a ratio Department of Labor has defined. If the company has 25 or fewer employees, they become dependent if 8 or more are on H-1B. If the company has 26 to 50, it's 13 or more employees that become dependent. And if it's 51 or more employees, it's if 15% of the workforce is on H-1B. So it's not 80%, 90%. It's not even 50-50 always. There can be that difference. And then, so we have to make those extra attestations, but there is what's called exemption. You can file exempt from those attestations if the worker has a master's degree or the wage is over 60,000 or both.
And that's a little silly given this day and age. I feel like a lot of workers have master's degrees now. A lot of workers are paid more than $60,000 a year in 2026. So it's not been updated since 1998, which tells you kind of how often Congress has been revisiting the H-1B statute. And I do think that's an area where we need some reform because that floor is way too low.
Yeah, and I think it causes some of the confusion, right? The company sees on Department of Labor, okay, this is a dependent company. Why are they not having to recruit, right? Well, they're probably exempt because again, it is a low threshold, but it isn't a loophole. It's not, this made up thing. It's congressional. So let's kind of flip this around now because I think it's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit this episode. What does an LCA not prove?
All right, let's go through the list.
All right, it doesn't prove that there has been a hire. As said, the LCA gets filed before the petition. It doesn't require you to file the petition always. If the job falls through, if the employee decides not to join, maybe it gets denied. Maybe you decide we're going to go a different direction. There's the possibility it never got filed. It just means this is the predicate to filing an H-1B.
It also doesn't prove that the worker is actually being paid what wage is listed on the LCA, because a lot of times the LCA will state a range for the wage that the employer is committing to pay, but the actual wage that the employer agrees to pay is listed on the I-129 form, not necessarily the LCA. And that's what has to be on the worker's W-2. That has to be at least as high as what's on the LCA, but the LCA doesn't tell you what exactly the compensation is because it doesn't include bonuses, stock options, things that are just not part of that form.
But you can do a range
Mm-hmm.
too. Third, it doesn't necessarily prove, and this is going to sound weird, that the worker is at that work location. We see this cause a kerfuffle a lot in the social media world. Like there should be 30 H-1B employees here. Why are they not here? LCAs are really allow for a lot of flexibility in what's called the area of intended employment. This is defined multiple ways. We could talk about metropolitan statistical areas. We could talk about normal commuting distance. It's kind of defined both ways. Um, People can move. Projects can change. Um, as long as they file a new LCA when it's required, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if somebody goes from 123 Main Street in Houston and now they're going to move across town to Katy, it's in the same metropolitan statistical area, it's in the normal commuting distance, and a new LCA is not required. They would do posting at the new work location. And so you might see an LCA for 123 Main Street. Well, why is there nobody here? They might have moved.
All right. Also, the LCA does not prove that the employer couldn't find a U.S. worker because that's not a requirement for the vast majority of H-1Bs. There is no labor market test for an H-1B. That's perm. That's for the green card. LCA does not require the employer to have tried to hire a U.S. worker first, unless it's an H-1B dependent employer and they're not exempt through that $60,000 wage floor or for a master's degree.
I think fifth, it doesn't necessarily prove anything on the efficacy of it being a specialty occupation. All right, we saw a while back people like, oh, there's 7-Eleven. I could go get an LCA certified, for an underwater basket weaver, for any company because again, is it complete, right? So the petition then has to be filed. USCIS will adjudicate, does an underwater basket weaver require a degree in a specific field? The answer is no. And so we're not going to, even if there is an LCA for a 7-Eleven cashier, which somebody pulled a screenshot saying there was, that doesn't mean that an H-1B got approved for a 7-Eleven cashier.
And along those lines, it also doesn't prove that the worker is actually qualified for the role. That, again, is something that USCIS determines. The LCA is completely silent on the worker's credentials. The worker's name isn't even on it. Nothing about what their education background or even the education background of the position isn't listed on the LCA. It's job title, SOC code, prevailing wage, work location, and then the attestations.
Yeah, and then I think importantly, an LCA is a predicate to every H-1B petition, so extensions, transfers, amendments all require an LCA. Like I said, it's not a clone, right? It's not a labor clone application. If we talk about, we're getting now to seeing green cards getting approved for people who started the green card process that are Indian born, who started in the middle of 2014. All right, so we're at 12 years in. Assuming their first date on H-1B was at the beginning of that, which it probably was before, they would have had to have gone through at least 4 LCAs during that time because they're each good. Petition's only good for 3 years. LCA can only be good for 3 years. There could be amendments. It's not impossible for an individual, like you said, to have a dozen LCAs that they've gone through during their time. That's not 12 new people. That's not 12 new jobs. It's what is needed to file the H-1B petition. So when you see this company filed 500 LCAs, that doesn't necessarily mean there are 500 new people. It could be amendments, it could be extensions, it could be maybe they filed ahead of the cap, a bunch of to get them ready. Who knows what it could be.
And we're not saying the LCA data is meaningless. It is a useful indicator of intention of a company to hire someone or direction of where they're going to go. But just treat it for what it is. It's a labor filing. It's not a hiring report. And USCIS does have more specific data about actual H-1B filings in their employer data hub. If you want to look up and see how many H-1B petitions did a certain company get approvals for in a certain year, you can actually find that on the USCIS website instead of looking at how many LCAs it took to get those number of petition approvals.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, actually, it's kind of interesting because if I remember correctly, like you could always get some of the data, but like the presentation the way it is now was the first Trump administration to give all the like performance data for perm and LCAs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a relatively new of them giving all this data. You can kind of look it up,
Yeah.
but not the way it's presented
Yeah.
now.
All right, so let's talk about what happens after the LCA is certified because the obligations don't stop at the filing of the LCA or even the filing of the H-1B. This is where employers can actually get in trouble with wage and hour audit.
Yeah, and so the LCA is a continuing commitment. Once you have the supporting LCA or the certified LCA supporting a petition and the workers on board, you're on the hook for everything in that LCA during the authorized employment period.
All right, number one, the public access file, the PAF. Within one business day of filing the LCA, the employer has to make available a public access file. They either need to keep it at their principal place of business or where the work is actually being performed. What goes into that PAF is specific: the certified LCA, the wage rate, an explanation of how they came up with the actual wage, documentation of how they came up with the prevailing wage, proof that they actually posted the notice of filing, proof that they gave notice to the employee, the H-1B worker, and the summary of benefits that are offered to U.S. workers. All of that is how DOL determines whether this company is actually complying with the LCA regulations.
And it is a public access filing, meaning people of the public, a journalist, competitor, former employee, government, whatever, shows up to your office and asks to see it. You have to produce it. You don't get to say, why do you want it? Now, you only have to present what is required as part of the public access file. And I think there's a little um, discussion to be had. Some folks will say, well, you have to give it to me within one day. I think you have to make it available. You have to have your file, so you should be able to. But if someone goes to Facebook and says, I want to see all 1,000, I think there's a reasonableness time to it.
All right. And then there is payroll obligation. So the employer has to pay that LCA wage throughout the employment. They cannot reduce the wage. They cannot reduce hours. They can't pay less than what the petition specified. All of those would be violations.
There's also record keeping requirements, payroll records for H-1B workers and similarly employed U.S. Employees have to be maintained. Wage and Hour Division with Department of Labor can come in and audit that based off of either the complaint or a random investigation. And so you have to keep those records for the duration of the employment and for most categories in the year after the employment ends.
All right. And again, the H-1B worker does have to receive a copy of their own LCA on or before their first day of employment. And so use that information to verify, hey, is everything actually correct? Is my job described correctly in terms of the SOC code? Is my wage level that's used for the prevailing wage correct based on the level of complexity of the job that I'm doing? And if it's not, you need to talk to the employer, talk to an attorney, and make sure that the H-1B petition does properly reflect it. That's why they give you the LCA, so you can make sure your rights are actually preserved as well.
There's one more thing. The employer can't require the H-1B employee to pay the acquia fee, which is $1,500 or $750, depending on the company size. Employer can't make the employee pay for attorney's fees associated with the H-1B petition. These are violations that Wage and Hour goes after.
And if a company decides to terminate an H-1B worker before the end of the 3-year period or whatever period the H-1B was approved for, they have to take specific steps to actually be effective in doing a bona fide termination. That's what ends the company's liability for continued wages. So that means they have to actually tell the worker that they're being terminated. That's kind of important. But they also have to tell USCIS that the worker is being terminated, and they have to offer to pay the reasonable cost of return transportation for that worker to their home country or wherever they came from outside the US.
Yeah, so let's go to a question I get quite a bit from companies. Worker moves, one location is about to move. Do we need a new LCA and therefore a new petition?
Yeah, so the framework here is this idea of material change. If something material about the employment changes, you need a new LCA. And whenever you need a new LCA under the current requirements, you also need to file an amended petition.
Yeah, so let's talk about common material changes. Number one is going to be a worksite change. Now, if they're going outside of the area of intended employment, like I said, the metropolitan statistical area or normal commuting distance, which are which is broadly defined, um, listed on the original LCA, you have to do a new LCA, which then means a new H-1B petition has to be filed as well.
And this is coming from the matter of Simeo Solutions 2015 precedent decision from the Administrative Appeals Office, AAO. Basically, before that, if a worker was going to be moved to a new location, the company would still have to get a new LCA and do the notice of filing at the new location, but an amended H-1B petition was not a requirement. Simeo changed that and said anything that requires a new LCA must be considered a material change. Therefore, you have to file an amended petition.
Like I said, a move within the same MSA does not require a new LCA. You just again have to post the old notice of filing at the new work site.
Now, short-term placements provides a little bit of leeway in situations where an employer needs to send someone off-site for a month or something, and then they come back to their regular work site. So the regulation allows up to 30 work days per year, some cases up to 60, depending on the situation, to allow a worker to go to another work site that's not on the LCA. There are very specific conditions for that. And most importantly, you can't use this short-term placement provision as a workaround for a permanent move. So I see a lot of times companies will have the person move first, wait 30 days, make sure everything's going good with the new client or new customer, and then they'll file the amended petition and claim that, oh, the first 30 days was a short-term placement. No, that's not how it works. So if it was intended that the person was going to stay there more than 30 days, you've got to file before they move.
Yeah, I think the best way to think about this, is the example of, hey, you work here in Houston, we're going to send you to Chicago for a week to implement, go live, our go live here. We're going to pay for your hotel. We're going to take care of everything. It's only for a week, and then you're coming back to Houston. That is short-term placement. There are also non-worksite material changes, such as the job duty changes to make it a new occupation. So if you go from a software developer to a lawyer, you're going to need a new LCA. But it also could be in the same field too. If you're going from like a computer programmer and now you're the IT project manager because you've been there for a while, it probably requires a new LCA.
That also an LCA is required when there's a change, like a reduction in hours, going from full time to part time or part time to full time. All of that needs an LCA, which means it needs an amended petition before you can make that change.
There's also certain changes in the employer entity. Generally, if a company goes through a merger, acquisition, or spinoff, there is a regulation that allows the new employer to become a successor in interest, which means they can take on the liabilities and rights of the new LCAs without new ones, but only if certain conditions are met. If they're not met, they would have to go through a transfer. But the new entity has to maintain a list of workers, has to provide additional documents with their public access files, and say that they're going to take on all these obligations. If they don't do all that, they have to do a transfer.
All right, so what does not require a new LCA? A raise. If you're getting paid more than the wage mentioned on your petition in your LCA, a new LCA, a new amended petition is not needed for that. A change in your title where your duties remain the same does not require an LCA. Change of supervisor, a move within the same MSA, none of those require a new LCA, but that move does require a new posting notice first.
Yeah, but Timing of new LCAs and new petitions is important. If you are moving and there is a material change or there is a material change in the job duties, the LCA and the petition have to be filed before the worker moves or starts that new role. It has to file the petition, not just the LCA with USCIS.
All right. And a practical point, if you're an employer and you're not sure whether a change is considered to be material or not, just call up your immigration counsel before you make the change. The cost of filing a new LCA, an amended petition, is pretty minimal. That is way different than the cost of having a worker fall out of status because you guessed wrong and did not amend the H-1B and did not get a new LCA.
In the current climate, it could be $100,000.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, we're going to wrap up now. So let's go through Stephen's top takeaways from this podcast.
Yes, I got a couple or three. First, LCA is just a labor filing, not a petition. It's a prerequisite. It's a set of attestations. It's not an adjudication. It's not approval. It doesn't prove hiring, payment, qualification, or not always the right location either. Second, that the company has the four attestations, the wages, working conditions, no strike notice. They're real obligations that are enforced by Wage and Hour Division. And, Wage and Hour has people throughout the U.S. That can go and inspect these as part of DOL to make sure you're following through with those. Third, material changes require a new LCA and a petition prior to those material changes taking effect.
All right, and I would add a fourth, which kind of goes back to where we started this episodes, and that's if you're listening to this, you're a journalist, you're, a curious member of the public, you're a congressman.
Senators.
Remember what you're looking at when you're looking at LCA data. You are not looking at H-1B workers. You're not looking at petitions, approvals. You're just looking at the basic data of a company's intentions at one point in time, which may have changed.
So, if you're listening and you have questions about, do I need a new LCA? Feel free, reach out to your immigration partner, but keep tuning in and we'll try to keep an eye out for what are some good topics.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you found this useful, please be sure to share it. And we'll see you next time.